Good to have your company. We begin with the fast-moving developments in the Gaza Strip. Yet more people have been killed and wounded as Israeli shelling and airstrikes continue for a 23rd day. And this is perhaps the worst of it. 16 people killed when a UN facility formerly used as a school was hit just after dawn. Now, those inside were from the Jabalia refugee camp and had been taking shelter from the firing. The area has been under intense assault for several days. Hospital staff are once again overwhelmed with casualties. Dozens of people are being treated. They say their shelter had neither weapons nor armed men at the time that it was hit. And there's no sign of an end to the fighting. This is the scene live now from Gaza, where strikes continue. The scale of a humanitarian crisis brought home by the UN, who say almost 250,000 people are without shelter and that its teams are almost at breaking point. In a moment, we'll be live to Imtiaz Taib in Gaza and our diplomatic editor James Bays in West Jerusalem. But first, we take a look at this report from Imtiaz from inside that UN school shortly after it was hit.
I am in what was normally a classroom, but for the last 2.5 weeks has been effectively a safe house, a safe haven, if you will, for those who are sheltering from this ongoing bombardment of the Gaza Strip. This room, this classroom alone, around 70 people were taking shelter here, mostly women and children. And I'll just show you around, just give you a scale, around a sense of scale of the bombardment of this. We understand that it was tank shelling. You can see over here, you can see what's left of what was basically what these people's lives were. You can see some toys, you can see some food stuff, but really it's just a scene of utter devastation. I'm just going to have my cameraman point to this wall over here. This was the impact point. Again, as we've been saying, it was tank shelling. That's what this area came under fire from. Again, an area which was meant to be safe, an area which has been designated by the United Nations a safe area. The Israeli military has these coordinates. They know people are sheltering here. In fact, this is only one room. This school is very large. Around 2,500 people are sheltering in this area, but as we've been seeing, they're not very safe.
Well, Imtiaz has now moved to a different part of Gaza. He joins me live now from the Strip. And the strikes are continuing in the region. People very worried about what's going on. What is the latest in terms of the latest assaults on the area?
That's right, Sohail. A very unpredictable day here in the Gaza Strip. We understand that there has been shelling and bombardments, aerial bombardments in the north and the south. But one area in particular has seen the worst fighting, and that is Jabalia, where I was earlier this morning at that school, which was shelled by Israeli tanks, killing at least 16 people, injuring over 90. But what we also understand is that shortly after that, a market also in Jabalia was targeted. 6 people were killed there. 3 of them were children, and around 20 or so were injured, again in an Israeli strike. And just to give you an idea of what Jabalia is a refugee camp. It's been a refugee camp since 1948. Well over 100,000 people live there. It is perhaps one of the poorest areas of Gaza. It's densely built, densely populated, and for the Israeli forces to target this areas, again, as we've been seeing, a number of civilian casualties are caught, and again, the Israeli forces targeting a safe area as well, and that, of course, has really just stroked the fear of the people there.
Indeed, and about 2 hours ago, Imtiaz, we saw a big leaflet drop from the skies. We presume it was from the Israelis. What did those leaflets say, and who were they for?
Well, we've seen leaflets in the past. Normally, they tell people to leave certain areas. They tell them that the bombardment is coming, that airstrikes are coming. But from what we understand, that this leaflet was different. This leaflet basically contained a message and a telephone number. And that message was, if you see any Hamas fighters, if you see any fighters from any of Hamas's sort of armed wings, if you will, to call that number, a number for Israel Israel's security forces to call them and to let them know. But again, this, as we've been saying, that normally these leaflets are dropped in these neighborhoods to warn people to leave. That didn't happen. Certainly didn't happen this morning when that school, where so many people have been sheltering for the past 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, have been staying, and indeed so many lives were lost there as well.
Indeed, a very unpredictable day, as you said, Imtiaz. We'll follow that with you from Gaza as the day progresses. For the moment, thank you. Now, at least 6 UN facilities have been hit since the offensive began 3 weeks ago. Now, they act as refugee shelters in times of conflict. The UN operates 85 shelters in the Gaza Strip. More than 200,000 people are living in these facilities. Joining me now on Skype from Geneva is Chris Gunness. He's spokesman for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Gunness. A week ago, another of your UN shelters was hit. I mean, what's your reaction to today's attack?
Look, last night, children were killed as they slept next to their parents on the floor of a classroom in a UN-designated shelter. Children killed in their sleep. This is an affront to all of us, a source of universal shame. Today, the world stands disgraced. We've visited the site, we've gathered evidence, we've analysed fragments, we've examined craters and other damage, and our initial assessment is that it was Israeli artillery that hit our school, in which 3,300 people had sought refuge. We believe there were at least 3 impacts. It's too early to give a confirmed official death toll, but we know that there were multiple civilian deaths and injuries, including of women and children, and the UNRWA who was trying to protect the site. These are people, by the way, who were instructed to leave their homes by the Israeli army. We condemn in the strongest possible terms this serious violation of international law by Israeli forces. We have moved beyond the realm of humanitarian action alone. We're in the realm of accountability. So UNRWA calls on the international community to take deliberate international political action to put an end to this continuing carnage.
Now, we've mentioned that you have 85 shelters in the Gaza Strip. 6 of those have been hit in the last 3 weeks. What are you doing to, if I can say, protect your shelters? Surely the Israelis know where your shelters are and where your facilities are.
Just to be clear, there have been 6 incidents of our shelters being struck, but it's 5 schools that have been hit. Well, you know, what do we have? We have international law to protect us. We have the moral force and moral outrage of people who are seeing what's going on. We have the principles of humanitarianism. We don't have an army. We're a humanitarian organization. And to be perfectly frank, you know, we're reaching breaking point. Our staff, the very people who are leading the international response, are being killed. Our shelters are overflowing. With this offensive, if it does continue, tens of thousands of people may soon be stranded on the streets of Gaza without food, without water, without shelter. So enough is enough.
Mr. Gunness, who protects you then? Who protects you? Because if you're saying that, you know, you're protecting the civilians themselves, who's actually protecting your organisation? Because, as you say, there should be universal shame, there should be accountability, and all we tend to see from the UN is it is a talking shop. Nobody actually defends you in the long run.
Well, I mean, what do we have? As I say, you know, we have the principles of humanitarianism. Our shelters, our facilities are meant to be neutral, and the parties to this conflict need to honour their international obligations to respect the inviolability of UN premises and, of course, international humanitarian law obligations to protect humanitarian workers. But as I say, we don't have an army. We don't have a police force. We're unarmed humanitarian workers. We're vulnerable. We're being killed. You know, it's tragic, but what else can I say?
Well, let's just clarify something else then. Israel often claims, and we're waiting for them to respond to this incident officially, that locations like this harbour Palestinian fighters and rockets. Was that the case last night?
We have absolutely no evidence that that was the case. As I said, we've done an initial site visit, and that is what we can say so far. There were no evidence of militants firing rockets out of the school whatsoever.
We will be speaking to our correspondent in West Jerusalem, but earlier James Bays, our senior diplomatic editor, suggested that there will be a very highbrow conversation, possibly at the UN in New York later in the day. But what message do you have for those in the corridors of power in Israel?
From the ground, from the battlefield, we send up a desperate cry from the heart to say those who have the power to make the guns fall silent and to force those whose fingers are on the triggers to stop pulling them, to get into action, because the humanitarian community is overwhelmed. As I say, we've moved beyond the realm of humanitarian action alone. We're in the realm of accountability. We need accountability.
For the moment, Chris Gunness, thanks so much for joining us and for your insight into what's happened over the last, certainly, 15 hours.